Hi friends, this is Ankur from FinstudyClub. So let's just talk about another very interesting aspect, which is the continuing residual income. Now this is something which, well, by substance you have already done, but let's say unknowingly is something that you have already included that in your calculations. So what is continuing residual income? And for that I'll have to just recall the concept of the forecast horizon. Now this is time, using which is a time zone which divides my future into two portions. One is the portions up to which I can forecast individually, and the portion for which I'll have to take a simplifying assumption, maybe the constant growth, or let's say the zero growth or whatever else. So forecast horizon is an important time frame into my valuation exercise. Now for a residual income, we have seen that there are 2-3 models. One, the residual income is only finite, and the second is it is infinite. Within infinite we have the constant growth, and within infinite we have residual income being constant. Now here the limited point is that whenever it is going to be infinite, you will have to individually forecast the residual income up to a particular time zone, which is called as the forecast horizon, after which you will have to take a simplifying assumption. Do you see that I'm exactly repeating what I just told you? So therefore I'm making a very solid point that there is nothing new that I'm telling you. It is the terminal value of the future residual income which needs a little more stress in this particular session. That is all. The continuing residual income is the residual income expected beyond the forecast horizon. So this is exactly what I've done with my dividends also. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to calculate the individual residual incomes up to the short term, what we used to call it as a short term growth period. I'm going to call it as up to forecast horizon in this case. So the residual income will be forecasted individually, and for the residual income beyond the forecast horizon, I will calculate the terminal value here first and will bring it back here. So, and again, the simple basics, time value of money is going to kind of come into picture. Now the important and let's say the strategic point here is that what will be the behavior pattern of residual income beyond forecast horizon. And like I told you before, that for dividend and free cash flows, it is absolutely okay to assume that they are going to grow continuously, but here it is not that okay to assume that RI is going to grow for reasons that we have discussed. So don't be surprised if the assumption of continuing residual income is that it does not exist at all. That means the forecaster is assuming that I will be able to generate surplus only up to forecast horizon, after which the RIs are going to cease to exist. Quite possible. Another forecaster can assume that they are going to continue to exist at the flat rate. The same amount is same. So again, we have done one of the cases in which I'm going to calculate the PV of such by dividing it by cost of equity. The third could be, so I'm essentially talking about these 3-4 parameters. So it's like the RI continues indefinitely at the positive level, which means the RI is going to be constant. It is RI is 0 from the terminal year onward. This is the first point that I just took up. The third is something which is critical, which says that RI is not increasing constantly but is actually decreasing constantly. And I have a different slide and a dedicated slide to refer it to omega. Omega is nothing but a negative growth. If today I am 10 and tomorrow I am, let's say, 9, I can assume that I have grown by minus 10%. So 0.9 is my omega factor, and we're going to talk about that. So this is absolutely similar to the Gordon growth model, in which I'm going to do RI, maybe let's say if this was 4 years, then I'm going to do RI 5 divided by K minus G. The only thing is that G in this case is going to be negative. So, and therefore, that's my reason of highlighting it with a different color, that this becomes the most important case out of these 4. The fourth point also is a little statistically oriented, which says that RI may not become 0, nor does it, kind of, let's say, remain flat. It will kind of, it will reflect the reversion of the ROE to some mean level, and it's going to kind of maybe come down to a level and then become constant. So there are different patterns that you can kind of see. Don't be bogged down by looking at this formula. This is again nothing but let's say a statistical representation of the time value of money that you have been doing so far. So so this remains the book value at T0, and rest everything else remains the present value of surplus. Now within the present value of surplus, the first portion remains the present value of surplus up to forecast horizon, okay, which is the same equation here. The second portion here is the present value of the surplus being generated after the forecast horizon. So this section is something which is related to the continuing residual income. Now the question comes up again, that how would I calculate the present value of the residual incomes beyond the forecast horizon, and what would that be called as? And here I would like to just kind of want you to pay a little attention. I'm trying to draw a parallel with the dividend discount model, that if whenever we were discounting the dividends, we were directly getting the justified value, okay, and it wasn't the value add or a surplus which was being discounted. It was a total absolute number, and that was directly giving me the justified value. So we said that the justified value will be the present value of D1 up to D infinity, okay, and we divided it, this time frame, with the forecast horizon. So let's say, for simplicity, let it be let's say 2 years. So it will be D1 plus D2, and from D3 to D infinity, what we did is we calculated P3. Now, and this became the formula, like it's a 2-year holding period. So obviously these will be discounted suitably, but this was the structure. Now an important point that I would like to highlight: whenever we are talking about the justified value and the market price and the disparity between that, we are making a very silent assumption that the disparity will exist today. Ideally, what I have calculated as P2, my apologies, it should have been P2. What I would have, I have calculated as P2, I should have written is justified value 2. How do I know what is going to be the market price at T2? The market price can be told only historically. So when I say that in future my P3, or let's say my P2, is equal to D3 upon KE minus G, I'm making a simple point that the capital markets are going to be efficient, and therefore I'm going to directly jump onto my the justified value at the end of second year, which will be same as the price. My limited point that I'm making is not between whether it's going to be justified value or price, but it is going to be the same parameter which I am ultimately trying to calculate. What I'm trying to say is, since I am discounting the absolute, I am getting the absolute terminal value at T2. If I am forecasting the surplus, then the present value that I'm going to get will also be of the surplus. I'm still standing at T2, okay, and the surplus that we have been debating so far, V0 is equal to B0 plus PV of surplus. So the surplus that we are debating is V0 minus B0. So if this surplus is being generated at T2, it should be V2 minus B2. And we have assumed that in future that the justified value will be same as the the intrinsic value. I can write this as P2 minus B2. So in a way, this PT minus BT at whatever forecast time zone is nothing but the present value of the future residual income that I am expecting to generate, and this present value is being arrived at the time zone T. This is nothing but the terminal value of the residual income, that's all. So when I look at this formula, PT minus BT, what I have done is all the future residual incomes have been discounted at time zone T to be called as the present value of RI beyond forecast horizon, to be called as the present value of surplus, to be called as PT minus BT. Okay, so the last component in both the equations represent the premium over the book value at the end of the forecast horizon. If the forecast horizon was 2 years, for example, then I'm standing at T2, and what would be the market premium at that point in time over the book value? Why should the market give you a premium? For a very simple reason, because the market at T2 also believes that in the third year, in the fourth year, in the fifth year, you will still be able to generate some surplus, and that's exactly what is being discounted to give you the present value of that surplus, which is nothing but your PT minus BT. Okay, so this is something that you kind of just need to understand. So let me introduce the omega to you. Omega is something which has been overhyped, honestly speaking, to me, and as a scholar, as a student, as a faculty, omega is nothing but a negative growth. If let's say the profits, and like I mentioned to you that it is not possible to earn supernormal profit every time, it is a more reasonable assumption to assume that the profits are going to continue, but maybe the surplus generating ability is not. So while you can say that I will be continue to earn some EBIT, or maybe PAT, but the required return will also catch up. Maybe the risk perception will go up or whatever else. So the delta generating ability of the firm is going to go down. The residual income is going to experience a constant change, but that change is not on the positive side but on the negative side. This negative change is being captured by something called as an omega. I'm going to take a very, very simple example to explain to you what is omega. Okay, if your residual income upon KE minus G, okay, if let's say it was 5.5, the cost of equity is 10%, and growth, we had assumed it to be 2%. 2% growth would mean that between T0 and T1, I am going to experience a plus 2. What if the growth was minus 2%? Which means to say that a value at T1 was a little lower. So growth becomes minus 2. So G becomes minus 2. So minus minus becomes plus 2. My equation still remains Ri1 upon Ke minus G. It's just that the G now mathematically is a negative number, and therefore it gets counted as a plus. That is all that I am trying to do. Okay. If growth is minus 2, that means the value of 100 has become how much? 98. Now allow me to explain omega to you. Omega is the persistence factor that I have been able to hold after a year compared to the value that I was having before. So that means out of the total value, I've been able to hold 98%. Omega in this case will become 0.98. Okay, so omega is typically a value which is between 0 and 1 for a very simple reason, that now the ability of the firm to generate a surplus is fading over the life. Okay, and and let's say, allow me to kind of put a number, let's say in growth terms. So plus growth was minus 2%, you are automatically going to get an omega of 0.98. Okay, so let's say if the omega, someone tells me that omega is 0.7, that means from 1 I'm going to become 0.7, that means I'm going to go down by 0.3. that tells me that the growth is minus 30%. Okay, please do not be bogged down by any kind of an omega being written in the question. What you see here is your R minus G percentage only. So let's just put in some values here. So let's assume omega is 0.7. So 1 plus R minus 0.7. So we get R plus 0.3. This becomes a denominator if we go by this terminology. If you directly calculate Ke minus G, R minus growth, automatically you are going to get the same denominator. So please do not be bogged down by looking at this terminology. What we're trying to do is, again, this is the let's say the PT minus BT, the terminal value of the residual income, which needs to be discounted back. Okay, so how do you calculate that terminal value? The terminal value is essentially being calculated like this. Terminal value is being calculated like this. So it is Ri5, for example, upon Ke minus G is going to give you the terminal value at T4. which further needs to be discounted by 1 plus r raised to the power 4. So again, it is very simple math. So in this particular case, let's say the 4, I just kind of spelled that out. I have assumed that till 4th year individual RIs will be possible. Let's say 1, 2, let's say 3 or $4. So these are the 4 RIs, and the growth is going to go down by 30% going forward. So RI5 divided by KE minus G, I'm going to get P4 minus B4. This is going to be added to this and will be discounted, as simple as that. But please don't forget to add B0. What you're playing with in future is only the delta in case of residual income. My timeline that you have is only the delta in my residual income, nothing else. Okay, so just take that into consideration. So I have a quick question also, in which case we will just talk about a lot of cases and all. Let me just see if we missed anything. Yes, there is something that we kind of missed. So a lower omega, a lower persistence factor would simply imply that the firm is not able to hold its forte, and therefore it's go down dramatically, which tells us that the growth is falling significantly. The persistence factor is higher, the firm is able to hold whatever it had in a much stronger way if the firm is not paying dividend that much. And obviously that's pretty understandable. You got to have good wealth in the company, contained in the company, to be able to hold on to your forte. And the second is that the industry has high persistence factor. This is very critical for the company to be high persistence only if the industry is going strong. And that's where again the Porter comes up as a mathematical, as a strategic model. So here is a quick case, and this is largely being done. So I don't think that say you'll have to kind of dirty up your hands. So it's like the XYZ Corporation has a current book value of 20, reinvest all its earnings, which means the DPR, the dividend payout ratio, is going to be 0%. The return on equity is 14%. 100% retention rate also tells me that the dividends are going to grow by 14%. But anyhow, this might not be the growth in residual income, because residual income does not deduct the dividend, it deducts something else. So the return on equity is 14%, and the required rate of return on equity is 12. So that means I am able to generate a surplus of 2%, which is right here. So there will be some positive RI. Calculate the intrinsic value using the residual income model under the various assumptions. So the 5 years are being forecasted individually: T5, T4, T3, T2, T1. Okay, and after 5th year, I have to make an assumption about the RI, which is called as a continuing residual income. So after 5th year, the first assumption is that the continuing residual income falls to 0. Well, in this case, the justified value will be equal to the book value today plus the present value of each of these 5. So allow me to do something. Whatever happens, whatever is the assumption that you're taking for the continuing residual income, you will still need to calculate the book value, plus you will still need to calculate the sum total of these, plus the third element will be assumption specific. So allow me to calculate the present value of these 5 plus 20, coming out to be 1.85. So 21.85 is a constant number that in any case will happen irrespective of the assumption of the continuing residual income. So after 5th year, if the continuing residual income falls to 0, then my answer is going to be 21.85. Okay, after 5th year, if the continuing residual income continues at the same level of 0.68 at T5, so let's say T6 it is going to be 0.68, T7 is going to be 0.68. So I'm going to calculate the present value of the residual income from T6 to T infinity, and the value will be calculated. PT minus BT will be arrived at 5, and I'm going to get 0.68. A perpetuity divided by return on equity is 12%, which is 5.67. Now please don't forget that this number that you're getting is the present value of surplus at T5, it's a terminal value, you got to discount it further back for 5 years using this 12%. So the present value of this at T5 is going to be 3.2, which means 3.2 is the net increment at T0 because of the continuing residual income happening beyond T5. So I'm going to add 3.2 here, 1.85, and the total intrinsic value is going to be 25.06. Okay, the third case, and maybe allow me to use a fresh slide. What we're seeing is that the persistence factor of 0.3 is playing. So I am T5 versus T6. I will have to calculate residual income 6 upon KE minus G. We'll be able to arrive at the delta PT minus BT at 5. So I will use P5 minus B5. So let's calculate that. The cost of equity is going to be 12%. Growth is going to be negative 70%. So here the persistence factor of 0.3, that means $1 is going to become 0.3. That means the growth has gone down by 70%, which means to say it is going to be 70%. So the denominator becomes 82%. How much is RI6? Well, RI6 is RI5 0.68, 0.68 into 1 plus growth. Growth is minus 70%. So 0.68 into 0.3, 0.204 divided by 0.82. 0.24 is the value that I am getting here. 0.24. This needs to be taken to T0, getting a number of 0.14. So 21.85 plus 0.14, I'm getting a number of approximately $22. Okay, now this is an interesting case. Now here the pattern of continuing residual income is not given. What it in fact tells us that the price to book ratio falls to 1.25. That means the price at time zone 5 is equal to 1.25 the book value at time zone 5. So let's just try and calculate the book value at time zone 5. So the book value at time zone 5 has already been calculated at 38.5. So 1.25 into 38.5. So the expected total value of, now this is not delta, the number that I am now calculating is not delta, it is cumulative justified value at T5 into 38.5, 48.125 subtracted by 38.5. Now what I am calculating is PT minus BT. So the number that now I am going to get, minus 38.5, this is the present value of surplus. This is ideally the delta. So 9.625 is the number that I am getting here, 625, whose present value at T0 is going to be 5.46. Adding it in 21.85, 27.31 is the number here. Okay, so just a quick recall again, that price to book ratio fell to 1.25. that meant that the price is 1.25 times the book value, which was 38.5. so the number of 48 that we calculated was quite similar to the present value of the dividends or the free cash flows that I would have done and calculated as the terminal value at T5. So in a DDM, the terminal value would have been this. In a residual model, I am always interested in plotting the surpluses, which is for which I will have to deduct the book value, and that is where I get to this 9.625, which I plotted here in addition to what I've already done, discounted it back to 5.46. So 5.46 is the present value at T0 of the continuing residual income starting from T6 to T infinity. That's how I look at it. Okay, so I hope that the session on continuing residual income was clear. It was plain and simple, although it had a bit of calculations. I look forward to speak to you in the forthcoming sessions. Thank you.